All right, well, welcome to our discussion of the case of the unsolved murder in the Torah, the Egla Arufa. It's the question of leadership and the preservation of human life. What is the role of leadership in preserving human life? You might say the role of a rabbi is to answer halakhic questions, to promote the spiritual life of the community. The role of the rabbi in preserving human life would be nothing. The doctor is in charge of preserving human life, the nurses. You might say, what is the role of the government preserving human life? Who ever heard of that? What do you mean? We have the government's in charge of the roads and the schools and the preserving safety in terms of crime, but preservation of human life, is that the key role of government? Did anyone mention preservation of human life? The conventions, is that the role? Or is that not the role? So let's take a look at the story of the unsolved murder in the Torah. And from that, I believe we'll be able to get to this broader question. So bear with us as we begin with the Egla Arufa, the calf whose neck is broken. An interesting and a bizarre sort of ceremony. The rabbis acknowledge that it's bizarre. It's one of the chukim. It's one of the things the nations of the world make fun of us for because it's so strange. And yet, what is the meaning of it? Let's take a look. So we have in Parshat Shofetim, at the very last thing, is the case of the unsolved murder. It's interesting to note that it's in the context of various wars. You go to war, don't destroy the trees. When you go to war, you might find a beautiful woman, don't abuse her, make sure you marry her, etc. So there's a context of war. Okay, let's take a look. So let's read the verses first, and then we will we'll get into it and really try to understand what it's all about. Spotlight my video, and good. All right, so should you find if you find a dead body, someone is slain, on the land that God has given you as an heritage, and he fell on the field. Lo noda mi hikau. We don't know who slayed him, who killed him. Yatzuza kenecha v'shoftecha. Let the elders come out, let the judges come out. Umadedu el harim. Let them measure the cities that are near the field. Again, a field is opposite of a city. A city has walls and buildings. Field is the field outside the city. Every day you go home to your protected city every night, and during the day you go out to the field. So if you find in the field, let's see which city is closest to that particular dead body. So it says he was nofel. He was fall in the field. And the rabbis say not someone who's hanging on a tree. Why? Says the Rabbi Yosef Bechorshor, one of the Tosfot, one of the French rabbis, a little after Rashi, he said, because why did the Mishnah say in Sota that if he's hung, we don't have this ceremony? Because someone who kills someone will usually hide the body. He's ashamed. He's not going to hang the body because he's afraid of being caught. He's afraid of being killed. So murderers don't usually hang someone because they're afraid. And then we have to ask ourselves a question. Why is it that here in the South, right here a few miles away on Summer Avenue, there was a lynching? There were a number of lynchings in the South. If the Rabbi Yosef Bechorshor is right, that when you kill someone, you don't want to lynch them. Why were the lynchings in public? What's the answer? Sorry?
They wanted everybody to know that.
Right. There was no shame at all. Right? There was no shame at all. That was the case of a murder where there was no shame at all. That case and the one on Summer, they had a whole party. They invited people to come and they had popcorn and they enjoyed the lynching. Others were done in the middle of the night, but it was also, they realized they could get away with it. So they lynched in the morning. People discovered that someone had lynched 1 or 2 or 5 people, and they were not afraid. But generally speaking, people are afraid. So if he's hung, we don't have to worry. He mentions also that maybe he committed suicide. If someone is hung, could have been suicide. So we don't need to investigate the murder. Maybe it's a suicide. The Dat Zakenim is also part of the Tosfot school. He quotes the same rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Bechorshor, and many rabbis take this position. It's the Rambam and it's the Barbanel and the Akidat Yitzchak and so many different commentators. So it's in French rabbis and Spanish rabbis. That what? The reason we have this ceremony to determine who killed the murderer is so the word will get out. As we'll see in a moment, we have a bizarre ceremony we're going to have, and everyone's going to say, what's this bizarre ceremony? Someone got killed. Well, who got killed? This guy over here. When was he killed? Why was he killed? And before you know it, we will solve the murder. We will solve this murder mystery. So that's in a position. The Torah said that Avram, the Ibn Ezra actually says that Hashem siva lasos kein al yir kruva ki lulei shasu avira lo yizdamen shereg mehem. He says if the local town didn't do something wrong, it wouldn't have happened to a person close to them. In other words, I should feel as a rabbi, let's say, or the mayor should feel as a mayor of a town, that if something bad happened in your city, something wrong with your city. You're doing something wrong. Nata Greenblatt once said, he said, all these people are dying. What have we done wrong here in this city? Something's wrong in our city. So there's a suspicion that you have to get to the closest city. Some sin has been done in that city. They need to look more carefully at themselves. Okay. Judy, did you have a comment?
No, I just wanted to know if you were joking here.
Okay, sure. So let's go on. So what do? They found this city. They measured to the closest city. They bring the Levites because God chose them to serve him and to bless his name. And they're involved with all cases. In other words, they're not going to do anything ritual over here. They're not going to bring a sacrifice, but they're needed because all cases should be involved with them. Kohanim are part of the leadership team of the Jewish people. The Chozik, and also the elders, the judges, the Sanhedrin of that city, they should also, who are close to that murdered body, they should wash their hands over the neck of the calf that's going to be broken in that particular place.
Rabbi, I do want to ask you a question. I thought it was against halacha to kill any other animal except by Shofetim.
Very good. That's why this is so bizarre, because usually you're right. You slaughter an animal. There are only two cases. Well, actually, this is the only one where some sort of ceremony is done with an animal, and you don't. I'm sorry, two cases. The throwing off the cliff on Yom Kippur, we throw an animal off the cliff. On the red heifer is slaughtered, but he's done outside the temple. And this one is also done outside the temple, and he's not slaughtered. You break his neck. And if you think it's strange because you're worried about animal rights or whatever, farmers definitely thought it was strange. You don't kill an animal. Animals are valuable. A calf is going to grow into a cow. A cow is worth $500 today. You don't destroy it. So it's so bizarre. Says Rabbi Yosef B'Chorshor, the Rabbanel, others, people will say, what's going on here? And they'll say, oh, someone was killed. They say, what do you mean? How did that happen? When did? Oh, on Tuesday. Tuesday, I saw someone suspicious walking through town with an axe over his shoulder. So maybe the murder will be solved. Correct. It is very strange. So they break the neck of they go to a ravine where it has never been worked, a very bad part of the land, and it shall never be worked. Never again can they do any work on that land. And they break the neck, and then the elders come there, and they say, our hands have not spilled this blood. We didn't see it. Atone for us, God, for your people, and please remove all guilt from our midst. So let's go back and understand what it says. Why the Kohanim? So Rav Hirsch says, why do the Kohanim get involved? He says they should worry about the sustenance of the sustaining of the human life, and that one person should not do any harm to another, because one of the greatest goals of all of the deeds of God with the Jewish people is that no one should hurt another person. One person who was killed on the land of God is a disgrace to our Torah. It is a rebuke, a very bitter rebuke to the leaders, and it puts in danger all that which the Kohen represents. And that's why the Kohanim must be there, because they represent all these values. And And don't forget that the Kohen shows up after the neck is broken, because it has nothing to do with sacrifices. As Judy pointed out, sacrifices are done with slaughtering. It's very different than the red heifer, which is done with slaughtering, and the Kohen is very involved. Here, the Kohen comes qua leader, and it stands against all the values of the Kohen. The Kohen's role as something to do with life is reflected by the fact that if someone kills someone by mistake, he can't go out until the high priest dies. So there's a relationship between life and the high priest. Why all the fuss? Why so much fuss? You know how much fuss there is? The elders come out. So the Gemara has one source that debates. Is there three judges come out, 5 judges? Small little court. It's not a big deal. There's no actual murderer over here. We're just trying to get to the bottom of it. However, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, one of the great sages of the Mishnah, says in a Braita and an outside source that the Sanhedrin has to come, and the king and the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. So why all the fuss, right? Because if Rav Samson Frau Hirsch is right, that one of the key roles of the Kohen Gadol and of the leadership is to make sure that there's no harm done one to another, then all the leaders need to go. One man was killed, the Sanhedrin, the king, the high priest have to get involved. It's a terrible thing. One person died. I believe that one of the great accomplishments of the state of Israel today is the fact that when one soldier is captured, the whole country goes nuts. They'll give up 1,000 terrorists if they have to, with great pain, but they will give up 1,000 terrorists to get one boy home, one dead body home. Right? What did they do to get Zach Baum after 30 years? They found my friend Zach Baum. They found his remains. They brought him home. That is a very Jewish value. Why all the fuss? Because a life is involved. And why break the neck? Judy asked the question, why break the neck? So he says, it's a symbol that someone died. Someone was killed in a strange way. You're right. Normally, an animal should be shechted, and we don't view it as a tragedy. He's going to become part of human consumption. It's better to be part of a human than to be part of a cow. A cow chews grass all day. A human being reads a book, does kindness, follows the mitzvot. Slaughtering is not a crisis. Even a normative death, it's tragic, but however, here something bizarre happened. An animal his neck was broken intentionally. What's going on? Because you have to ask yourself, what's going on? A human being was killed. As it says in the death of a salesman, something must be done. People must take notice. A man has been killed. Something has been done. There's when you have slaughtering, that's a normal death. Here, it alludes to a strange death. Someone was killed. Something has to be done. The Sefer HaBatim says maybe himself killed himself if he's hung on a tree. So they say, look, our hands have not spilled the blood. Please, God, atone for us and let the blood be atoned. And God, wipe out any innocent blood should all be wiped out. Let us do what's right in your eyes. What kind of prayer is it? So Josephus, who comments on the Bible in a little summary of the Bible, he says, probably there's some midrashim that support this, that it's a prayer that God not let this happen again. But that's not a very strong statement. It's like, we'll never let it happen again. You have to get to the bottom of what did happen already, right? To tell the protesters in Minneapolis or in Portland that it won't happen again. That's not good enough. You have to make justice happen about what already happened. That's very important. So what Josephus says is questionable, as usual. They say, we didn't spill any blood. So I'm a little bit uncertain about this. I think we talked about this another year. I think I had a solution, but I don't recall what it was. The classic interpretation based on our Talmud and Rashi, he said the sages of the local area, they say, look, we didn't do anything wrong. We didn't let this guy go out unescorted. We escorted them out. We gave him food. And I always wonder, really, can they always say that? Do they know that they escorted this particular fellow out? Really, they know so much about this guy? So I find it hard to believe. But in any event, maybe they're just saying, I think Rabbi Rosenzweig said, and Mechutin said, that they're just saying, look, in general, whenever someone leaves town, we always give them a little lunchbox. We escort him out of town a little bit. We watch them go off into the distance. We take care of our people. The Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, says that maybe he's talking about something else. That it wasn't as if we saw his case and we didn't do anything about it. That we heard that someone murdered somebody, but he was a rich guy, so we didn't do anything. No, that they took care of the justice system. So are we worried about the kindness, the charity, the hospitality of the community, or are we worried about the justice system? Either way, they have to come clean and say, we are taking care of our justice system and our social system, social welfare system. Samson Hirsch says, they have to say, in our society, no one is left in such a dangerous in such a bad situation that they're forced through poverty to do some kind of sin, like maybe to kill someone to get their food. Or, Chizkuni says, maybe somebody needed food, so he saw someone carrying food, and he wanted to grab the food out of his hunger, but the other guy who had the food stood up and killed the poor person. He said, we don't do things like that in our community. We have a food bank. We make sure that people who are poor get some money. So this is what the community has to come to terms with. Have they created a type of poverty that leads to death? Now, in this very political time we live, I must say, this is a very liberal sounding type of thing. It's saying the responsibility for crime in your community rests with whom? That's the question. Who is responsible for the murder in your community? Who is responsible for thievery in your community? Right? So, the sort of hardline position is the robber is responsible. You have to take responsibility. The American way, every person has to take responsibility for themselves. And what we're saying here is a more liberal perspective that says the society is responsible. If someone is so poor that he goes around stealing from people, that's the society's problem. Now, there are robbers who are billionaires, and they want to rob from more people so they can make more billions. That's true. But some robbers are led to it by the poverty caused by the lack of charity in the community. So this is very, very interesting. Why a calf? So they take a young animal that hasn't had any children yet, and they go to a place nothing has been done. There are no fruits in that land. It's very dry land. And they say from now on, nothing will ever be planted here. There will be no fruits. And the Talmud says that someone who stopped someone from having fruits because he killed him in midlife this is a symbol that we're going to kill this animal and he's not going to have any fruit anymore on a land that's not going to bear any fruit anymore. And because someone killed someone who's not going to bear any fruit anymore. And the Talmud says, it's not just about children, it's about mitzvot. And here we learn a very important lesson. Many of us are past the childbearing age. Does that mean that if there's only one respirator, shouldn't give it to us because we can't bear any children anymore? Some people will never bear children. They could never bear children to begin with. Does that mean they're less valuable than someone else? So the Talmud here is saying an important thing. The value of a human life is their ability to make fruit. What does that mean? To do mitzvot. If a person is alive, they have an opportunity to do mitzvot and do kind deeds, and those are the fruit. And that is the human worth is based on the fruits we can make, and we don't just mean children. We mean the deeds, the good deeds that a person can do. So therefore, we break a calf's neck as if to destroy them, to say, yeah, you think it's a big deal that I'm destroying this neck? Well, someone did something even bigger deal. He destroyed someone's neck, a human being, and he will never have children, never bear fruit again, whether physical children or mitzvot ever again. So that's how bad it is. Problem is, what if they didn't do it? I mean, somebody got killed, had nothing to do with this city. Someone came from a different city, an interloper, came and murdered someone in the middle of the city, a bandit, the Wild West. Someone came from the East, came into our beautiful Midwest little tavern county over here, and they killed somebody. What's it got to do with me? I didn't do anything wrong. The government didn't do anything wrong. The rabbis, the Kohanim, the elders, the judges. Someone So we're going to do this whole ceremony because maybe somebody in our community is responsible? What if we didn't do it? So what if it turns out that we know who the murderer is? Later on, it'll turn out that we found the murderer. So then, was the whole thing in vain? So the Gemara in Kritut, and I thank Tani, my son, for this, points out that we do this ceremony even though we know that maybe it's no one's fault. Maybe the guy killed himself. Who knows? But we're going to do this ceremony because even the possibility that we cause someone's death, that's significant. It's not in vain. If it turns out that, the next day they figure out who did it. So we said God's name and we brought the king and the high priest. What a waste of time. No. If there's a possibility that some life was taken unnecessarily, it's good for the community to look carefully at itself and evaluate, have we done everything we can for our society? What if they then find him already? 1 second. So you might take a very strange approach. You might say, this is a wonderful ceremony. It atones for the death. So then if they find that somebody killed him afterwards, they find Joe Blow and he killed him. So Joe could say, hey, oh, sorry, Joe, I don't mean to use your name. Herb so-and-so. Herb says, hey, look, it was already atoned for. Don't kill me for killing this man. The Cohen, they already atoned for everything already. So he's saying, no. This ceremony is, as we said in the previous page, it's about maybe somebody did something wrong. If you definitely did it, we're going to kill you. We're going to get you for it. We will not wipe that out just because we did an atonement ceremony. The atonement is not that effective. What we need to do is root out people like you who are the murderers. But now I want to ask a broader question. What's the point of it all? What are we really saying here? This very bizarre ceremony. You can look at this and say, oh my goodness, what kind of a ancient medieval hocus pocus is this? You take a calf and you break its neck in a ravine and a wadi, and the people wash their hands. They wash their hands. What does this got to do with it? So the Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam very often comes up with very practical answers. They're not always very satisfying because sometimes they're very practical. He says, well, and we mentioned before that many rabbis said the same thing, that you do this whole ceremony so the murder will be found and it won't go as an unsolved murder. Okay, fine. Shadal says, no. Shadal was an Italian rabbi over 100 years ago. He said, the main mitzvah here is to show that we're all responsible for each other. It's not really about just finding the murderer. It's a major statement made every now and then in the community. We are responsible for each other. You don't know who killed him? Well, why not? Why don't we have guards out? And why don't we have better roads and streets? Why don't we have better security, better policemen? Why did someone kill someone? Were they hungry? Was the victim hungry? Was the murderer hungry? What's going on in our community? It's so we'll be responsible one to another. Shadal has another idea. He says, when you realize how serious it is that a murder should take place in this holy land, you can't go the other way either. You might say, oh, this is terrible. Let's start a witch hunt. We've got to find the murderer. Well, that guy, he looks like he could be a murderer. Yesterday he made a joke about killing someone, so he must have done it. And then you hang the guy, right? That's what happens around here. That's had the lynching over here. Someone whistled at a woman or something, so he said he must have killed a different woman or something like that. So although we're so vigilant about death and about murder and about life, but we must also not kill someone who didn't do it. So make sure we wipe out innocent blood as well. In other words, you've got to make sure that those who are innocent are protected as well. So it's a very interesting counterpoint by Shadal of the Yishkoach for that. Rabbi David Kochavi is an interesting character. Very few people know about him. The Sefer Abatim, it's an interesting book. And my sons, Tani and Asher, have pointed out that this book is a wonderful book explaining the mitzvot. in addition to the Sefer HaChinuch that explains the mitzvah, the Rambam explains the mitzvah. He explains all the 613 mitzvot, and this is what he says. They were not negligent in the fixing of the roads and the guarding them. See, the other rabbis didn't talk about this. They talked about, maybe I mentioned it, but it wasn't in the sources. Here's the first rabbi who says, you know what the problem is? You have to have safe roads, right? Maybe then you have to have better lighting and to give food to the victim. That we mentioned before. The one who owns the land will work hard to find the murderer so they won't ruin his land. Because you're not allowed to work land where they're going to have to do this ceremony on a piece of land that's not workable. But maybe you could plant something. No, after this ceremony, you can never plant anything again. So where are you going to go? All of land is divided by tribes. So every piece of land belongs to somebody. So that tribe is going to say, whoa, wait a second. That family will say, wait, this is my ancestral land. Wait, I think we can solve this mystery. Don't do the ceremony. I think I can solve it. And then the mystery will be solved. Tzroar Moore, one of my favorite Spanish and Portuguese rabbis, he says, the reason the context over here is about wars. That if there's a war, don't chop down the trees. If there's a war, don't steal the women and just rape them. You should marry them. So he says, during war, people die. So maybe there's someone who hates his neighbor and decides during the war, he'll kill his friend and no one will notice. So he says, no. You have to make sure that the word gets out and no one has any excuses. The Kli Yakar also lived around 500 years ago. He was in Poland. And he says, if you don't let someone, that just like we don't want to wantonly destroy the fruits of a tree. You know, you're not allowed to knock down a cherry tree unless you need that cherry wood for a special project. But generally, you don't knock down a cherry tree. Knock down an oak tree. So you're not allowed to destroy fruit trees unless you have a very good reason. So too, you can't knock down a person who represents fruits. A person makes fruits. He makes mitzvot. He makes children. He influences others. You can't knock that down either. So it's an interesting thought by the Kli Yakar. But getting back to our main point, Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman was also a rabbi in Germany in the 19th century. And he says, the leadership representing the community are obligated for the human life, to punish the murderer and to prevent any obstacle, anything that might lead to murder. And through that, they're responsible to a certain degree for every loss of life. And if something happened, a murder, and they were not able to find the murderer, they have to atone for it so that everyone will recognize the responsibility that's placed on them. It's not just about finding the murderer. It's about recognizing the responsibility that's placed on them. You want to raise the level of responsibility among the people to preserve life, just like you want to punish the murderer as well. So this idea is that the leadership indeed has a very high responsibility to preserve life. We said at the beginning that it is one of the highest levels. The Rabbi Shimon says in our society, we don't allow things like this. We said at the beginning that that one of the highest responsibilities is that one person should not cause harm to another. And now this leads to an important point about preservation of life. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik said that the rabbi's first calling is to protect life. That's his first calling. And when he comes to a community, the first lecture should be that if you have any problem of preservation of life, don't call the rabbi. Save the life. If there's a problem of life preservation on Shabbos, violate Shabbos and save the life. If there's a problem of preservation of life on Yom Kippur, about fasting on Yom Kippur, break the fast and save your life. The rabbi felt that that was the first responsibility. In fact, Mishnah Berurah, a more famous halachic authority, perhaps, says in 328 in Orach Chaim, see, the Shulchan Aruch says, the Code of Jewish Law says, if you have a danger on Shabbat, it is a mitzvah to violate Shabbat. If an old person falls and breaks something, it's a mitzvah to call 911 and get that person help right away. And one who is more careful about this is praiseworthy. And one who asks about it, One who says, Rabbi, someone just broke their neck. Should I call them? Should I call the police or shouldn't I call the police? He says, the person who asked that question is spilling blood.
Yes.
Well, he doesn't know. So the Mishnah Berurah says, no, the rabbi in the place should have lectured that it's permitted so everyone would know and they wouldn't have to ask. If they ask the question, the rabbi is not a good rabbi. The rabbi in his first lecture should tell everybody, when it comes to preservation of life, we don't ask questions.
And that
It's
includes
one of the
your
prime obligations.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
That includes your animals too, right? There was
No. There are leniencies when it comes to animals. We allow some helping the birthing. I have to look into it further. There's some helping of the birthing that's allowed on Shabbos if an animal's giving birth.
like my dogs ran off on Shabbos. They put and so they were headed towards Highland, like in the big street. And
there are things you can do short of violating Shabbos to save a dog. You can tell a friend that you lost a dog. There are ways of. But the question is, if the dog was
I should have just sat here and just let them go for 8 hours.
I will look into it further, but as far as I know, there's no permission to violate Shabbos in order to save an animal's life. There are some leniencies about mialedet, but that's a separate lecture. I'll have to get into that. So let's get back to that another time about mialedet, about giving birthing an animal, and surely through that we can learn some of the laws about preserving animal life on Shabbos. But generally speaking, no, only to save human life. Part of the logic is that you save one Shabbos so that they can keep another Shabbos, but dogs don't really keep Shabbos. But don't worry, there are many ways of saving your dog short of violating Shabbos. There's a lot of things you can do. But
there was something about a cow in a pit.
Use a Gentile. Sorry?
If a cow falls in a
very
pit.
Good. Very good. Very good. Cow in a pit.
You could save it.
So
I think.
Rabbi, we have to leave.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Right.
I enjoyed it.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Okay, Shira, it's a separate topic. We'll get into it. That was on Yontif. That's on Yontif, where you are allowed to, if you want to slaughter one animal, you can bring it up. But it's not Shabbos, so that's a little different. So we'll have to look into it further, okay? But it's a great question, and we'll look into it further. Okay, moving along to our next point. Rabbi Samson Hirsch says, again, human life and animal life are completely different, and we do need to emphasize that. I cannot emphasize enough the difference in human and animal life. The equalizing of animal and human life is a very dangerous thought, but doesn't mean that we don't value animal life and that we don't take measures and we're not responsible, particularly for our own animals. For animals that are under our care, there's tremendous responsibility, and that's a great class. Maybe we have a separate class about that. Moving along.
Yeah.
Now, Rabbi Samson Hirsch says, hold on 1 second. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch says that as follows. The authorities have to stand before God in front of everyone and clean themselves in public from the suspicion that they were lax in fulfilling their role. We have seen several times that of all the values that are in the hands of the community as a whole and their representatives, meaning the leaders, the life of the human being is in first place. The flourishing of the whole land depends on the guarding of the sanctity of the life of a person. So it was a little strange that the Democratic National Convention, they focus so much on the pandemic. Surely, pandemic is not caused by Donald Trump. However, the notion that yes, the government is responsible for human life, this is correct. Part of the role of a president is to make sure that human life is preserved. That's a political question as to whether Trump or a different president did as much as they could or shouldn't do. That's a political question. You can ask the analysts. But the question of whether a government is responsible and that is their primary job to preserve life, the answer is yes. That is their responsibility. So when the governor says that anybody can do whatever they want, that liberty comes first, I don't know. Maybe that's an American ethos, but for Judaism, the preservation of human life would come above all else. Finally, we conclude with an agadic thought relating to Joseph. We know that this story of the breaking of the calf's neck comes up regarding Joseph. What happened? Joseph left his father. His father sent him off on a mission to see his brothers, and then the brothers sold him to slavery. 22 years later, the son sends calves to his father. So the calves were assigned to Jacob, that Joseph remembers a conversation they had about calves. So this unusual book says that that this Sphard-Beth, he says, from the medieval Provence, he says these calves were assigned from Joseph to Jacob for the sin that caused all the sorrow of Joseph being sold to slavery. Because this sin was similar to the Egla Arufa story. Because the idea is that the negligence of preparing the road and the guarding of those roads is the sin of the golden calf, of the sin of this story, of this law that we've been studying today, according to the Sphard-Beth, as we saw before. And Yaakov, and this is a very harsh criticism, as many Sephardic rabbis take this approach. Here's a Provençal rabbi saying that the forefathers are not perfect. Jacob was negligent and did not guard and to protect from the harm that could have come to his son when he sent his son to his enemies. Jacob knew that his sons hated Joseph, and he sent his sons, his one son, to go to his enemies. And because this, he believed when he saw those calves that he realized that he was alive, and he understood all the implications of what Joseph was saying, and that the calves were a sign of why this whole sin happened to him. It's a very radical thing to say, that Jacob was negligent, but the idea is an important one. We learn from his mistake. Jacob learned from his mistake that we need to escort people, as Jacob did, give them proper provisions, and make sure they're not in harm. And sending him to the enemy brothers was a dangerous thing. He shouldn't have done that. But the point is that leadership, including Jacob, are responsible for figuring out what could be dangerous. And therefore, during this coronavirus, certainly we have to say that the preservation of human life, making sure that that people have enough PPE, and that we're going to get vaccinations and whatever we need to do to preserve human life during this dangerous time, that is the responsibility of the government. One can't say that it's not. It belongs to the doctors or someone else, or that each individual has to take care of themselves. It is a primary role of the government and also of rabbis to play this role. People raise questions at the beginning of the Corona crisis. What are the rabbis getting so involved in? What does it got to do with them? This is not a rabbinic question. This is a medical question. So yes, the question of what's dangerous and not is up to the doctors. But the question of leading the community to preserve their lives, that is a rabbinic question. There is no higher calling for the rabbi than to preserve life. That's his first calling before anything else. So thank you for joining us today. That's our lecture, and now I'll take questions.